Okay, we were taught, we did, you guys wrote down the definition for deposition, correct? All right, and I talked about the parentheses. I talked about breaking the fourth wall right there. You never heard that phrase, breaking the fourth wall? All right. All right, and I think I left with this one, correct? All right. So we're going to go to the Last Supper, all right? And it's not the Last Supper that you are thinking of. By the way, the Last Supper is a popular image back in the Renaissance. But, and actually, this painting, I'm a little bit biased. I don't really like this painting, it doesn't appeal to me. However, it is one of the first instances where the linear perspective was used correctly. And it was one of the earliest uses of a single vanishing point. And that's what I want to get across to you guys. You guys have probably written down this term before, orthogonals. Make sure that you know this term. Orthogonals are the lines that go to the vanishing point way in the distance. Before, when we looked at the Marodi altarpiece, did it look like the table was a bit tilted, the floor was a bit tilted, the back wall was a little bit close? It just looked off. This one looks a little bit better. Still not perfect, but it looks a lot better. All right, we're going to France. What continent is France in? This is an easy question. Yeah, that's right. It's Europe. All right, and where is France on this map? It's right next to what? It is right next to Germany. That's right. All right. It's that red spot. And back in the Renaissance era, this is what the Kingdom of France looked like. These were the borders. And there was really no Germany as a country yet. It was called the Holy Roman Empire. And the Holy Roman Empire even went down into Italy. So past the Alps and into Italy. So, anyway, we're not here to talk about the Holy Roman Empire. We're here to talk about this painting. This is a diptych. If a triptych is 3 panels and a polyptych is many panels, what is a diptych? Yeah, 2 panels. Well, by the way, if you look at this guy's name, the artist's name, Jean, and the last name is pronounced Fouquet. I think that's funny. Although that's a very American attitude towards hearing a foreign sounding name. All right, are we done with this? Ready to move on? Anybody need more time? So if we get a closer look at this, there are 2 artworks. And this is a very odd diptych because it doesn't really look like these 2 paintings are even related to each other. The 2 guys on the left are in a different location than what's going on the right, and then even what they look like, almost looks like 2 different artists painted this. So this is, and by the way, this painting is just for fun. I just think this is a very strange painting, and I just think it's funny. So I thought I would share it with you guys. So on the left, if you look at the skin tones of the 2 guys on the left, they seem kind of normal looking skin tones. But if you look at the skin tone on the right, the skin tone is way off. The skin tone doesn't make any sense. It's like really a strange skin tone. And the skin tone is like almost like a pure white. And that is a reference to virginity and perfection. And purity is what the term that I'm looking for. All right, and Then on the left, it is the guy in the blue is Saint Stephen. He is holding a Bible with a stone on it. That stone, I'm going to talk about attributes later on. So I want you to hear this term attributes because you will be writing it down in the future. But an attribute is like a symbol to show you who this person is. Without that stone, we wouldn't know who that person is because there were no photographs back then. So we can't judge by the look of the face. But because he is carrying a stone, that's how we know who it is. And the Saint Stephen was stoned to death. So there's there's Saint Catherine who died on the Catherine wheel. She's always shown with a wheel. And there's other saints, for example, like Heracles. Is he fought the lion, so he has the lion skin. That's how you know it's Heracles. So that is an attribute. That's one of the things I wanted to point out with this. Then the guy in the red, that is a donor. How can you tell that that is a donor? He's on his knees. All right, donors are always depicted on their knees. Like he's not short. Like is it Farquaad in Shrek? Is that right? All right. All right. So it's not a short guy like Farquaad. He's on his knees. And so that's what makes him a donor. Now, I want to talk about her. She's very odd looking. She has weird anatomy, like not only the skin tone, but the anatomy. Her head is oddly shaped. Her forehead is giant. And the location of her breasts are very odd and spherical. It doesn't look natural. Anyways, the exposed breast is a symbol of motherhood because that's how mothers feed their young babies. And she's wearing a crown. And that happens a lot more in the Northern Renaissance than it does in Italy. Italy is not fond of monarchs. So they don't. There's not very many crowns in art of the Italian Renaissance. And then the red, white, and blue is the colors of the king of France at that time. So that is the reason for this red. I'm sorry, not red, yellow, and blue. It's red, white, and blue. Is the color the reason for the colors of red, white, and blue because those are the French colors of the king uh, uh, on his standard. And art historians wonder if this is the mistress of the king. So on the left is the portrait of the king's mistress on her sarcophagus when she died. And then on the right is a comparison between the painting and the portrait on the sarcophagus, and they very similar. So, but these are all idealized. The face is idealized on both. You're not gonna if she was unattractive, you're not gonna carve that. You're gonna make her look idealized because that's her eternal image. And art historians have looked at her skull and compared the skull to both the painting and the sarcophagus and realized that yes, that was her, the mistress. And we can compare this Madonna and Child with previous Madonnas and Child or Madonna and Childs. Anyways, and look at how much stranger this one looks than the previous images of Madonna and Child look. And another reason why the art historians think that this is an image of the king's mistress is that the king's mistress would walk around the castle with one breast exposed. All right, her name was Agnes Searle, and she had several children by the king, and that's just one of the things that she did. So that they think that that's a reference to his mistress. Anyways, I thought that this meme was funny. It's accusing this painting of being a painting of aliens. All right, moving on. I want you to know what a book of hours is. A book of hours is a manuscript, and basically it's a book of prayers, and they are illuminated or decorated with pictures. Now, I did not talk about illuminated manuscripts much last semester because there's just so many artworks to talk about. Um, I had to let some things go. But making books, before the printing press, how do you make a book? You write it, you copy it. Like, to make copies of the Bible, people sat in rooms and literally copied by hand pages of the Bible. How long do you think that takes? Like, it would take years to make a copy of a Bible. And so in a room full of people making copies, they could make 10 copies maybe in about 3 years. I mean, that's a very slow production. And I just want you to remember that, because as we start to modernize this semester, we run into some technologies that make things easier for people, like making books. Now, this is still hand drawn. So this is I think, one of the last books. How do I put this? This book was made in the last days before the printing press started making images and text in books. Anyways, so in this book of prayers, there are 12 images, one for each month. And we're going to take a look at January. By the way, the Limburg brothers are 3 brothers, and they worked for a short time, but they died of the plague before the age of 30. Prayer books were popular at the time, and this was a book of hours for the Duke de Berry. And so each month, an illustration with activities. So each month was illustrated with activities that were common for that month. And most of it was agriculture related. And at the top, they had the astrological signs of that month, or what was going on in the skies for that month. And you should know what astrology is. In the Renaissance, they used astrology to tell them when to plant their crops. Are we good to go? So in this January image, looks like we have a festival. We got some knights in the background. We have a table in the foreground with lots of stuff to eat. We have people, and it looks like all the nobles around the table and partaking of the feast. And you can see the fleur-de-lis in these roundels up at the upper right. Right? That means that it's French. Knights coming from the castle, ready for battle. And I just think that, so I don't know if these are crosses hanging from their bags, or they are handles, but it's a very odd placement. I just think it's strange. All right. Anyway, the one for October shows them planting, but these are, think of this. This is in a book. This is an illustration in a book that is hand drawn. This is not a larger illustration that has been shrunk down by a machine. This is a hand drawn in a book. And look at the detail in the background. That is an insane amount of detail. And just for fun, we're going to take a look at February. February is super cold, so we have this lady walking through the snow, and she is super cold. And then we have, I think this is odd and kind of fun, people warming themselves by the fire. You see the fire is right there, and they have pulled up their, I guess, shirts and stuff, their long shirts or their dresses to warm themselves by the fire. I thought that was funny. Sorry, this is small. I should have made it bigger.
The printing press is one of the most important inventions of all time. Its development ended the hegemonic control of information in Europe and changed history forever. The printing press allowed huge amounts of information to be shared quickly and in massive quantities. This eventually fostered the Protestant Reformation, the Renaissance period, the Scientific Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution. Before there were printing presses, all writings and drawings had to be meticulously done by hand. Several different materials were used to transcribe books: clay, papyrus, wax, or parchment. Few could do this work, given the great difficulty. Manually transcribing written works was usually done by scribes, who lived and worked in monasteries. Monasteries had a special room called the scriptorium. In this place, the scribe worked in silence, totally devoted to his function. First, he would measure and trace the page layouts. Then, he would carefully copy the text from another book. During the Middle Ages, books were usually the exclusive property of monasteries, educational institutions, or extremely wealthy people. Most books were religious. In some cases, a family would be lucky enough to own a copy of the Holy Bible. The earlier technologies that allowed the invention of the printing press included papermaking, ink development, and woodcut printing. At that same time, several medieval technological products and processes reached a maturity that allowed their use for printing purposes. Woodcut printing already existed in China during the Tang Dynasty in the 7th century, and continued to be the most common method in East Asia for printing books and other texts, as well as images, until the 19th century. During the 1300s to 1400s, people developed a rudimentary form of printing. They used letters or pictures cut out of wooden blocks. These blocks were dipped in ink and then used to stamp the paper. Near the end of the 1430s, a German named Johann Gutenberg was desperate to find a way to make money. Gutenberg had previously worked in a mint and realized that if he could use letter blocks to cut inside a machine, it would make the printing process faster. He would be able to reproduce a text in large numbers. Gutenberg's new invention was about to change the world. What distinguished Gutenberg's press from its predecessors was the mechanization of the transfer of ink to paper. He adapted the screw mechanism used in wine, paper, and linen presses to develop a system perfectly suited to printing. His device made it possible to create an initial assembly line production for printed texts. This made it possible to mass-produce books at a much cheaper cost than contemporary methods. With the newfound ability to mass-produce books at low cost on every subject imaginable, revolutionary ideas and invaluable ancient knowledge reached the hands of every literate European, whose numbers doubled every century. Science flourished during this era. For the first time, scientists had a tool capable of recording their discoveries and studies in writing, collaborating with each other across the European continents. Gutenberg did not live long enough to witness the immense impact of his invention, and died poor. His greatest achievement was the first printing of the Bible in Latin. It took 3 years to print about 200 copies, a miraculously fast achievement at a time when manuscripts were copied by hand. As literacy rates were still very low in the 1490s, residents gathered in bars or squares to listen to a paid reader. He would tell the latest printed news, which included lewd scandals or war reports. Printing technology spread rapidly throughout Europe. At a time of great religious change, it played a key role in the success of the Protestant Reformation. The leader of the Reformation, Martin Luther, initially could only preach to a small number of people, but the printed word spread his message to thousands of people who came to have access to the printed pamphlets. Luther was not the first theologian to question the Catholic Church, but he was the first to widely publish his new religious ideology. The modern world today would be a very different place without Gutenberg and his printing press. This technology made printing cheaper and more accessible than ever before. Today, the industry is already in the digital age, which has given rise to online printing companies and even home printers that allow anyone to design, print, and send printed materials, all quickly and efficiently.
All right, so I want you all to know this term right here, printmaking. So that's what we're going to get into now. All right, I want you to know what a woodcut is. So a woodcut, an artist carves into a wood block. He inks the surface of the wood block with a roller. So he gets the roller wet with ink and then he rolls it across, and the ink only sticks to the parts that are raised, not the parts that he cut out. And then he presses it against paper. All right, I'm going to see if we can. I'm going to go to 2 minutes, 30 seconds.
Will be revealed once printed as the white of the paper showing through. And what you leave is the black, the line work, the actual image itself, which will be stamped into the paper, either through the etching press or printing it by hand. But for the demonstration of this video, I'll be printing with an etching press. The first step I do is I sketch out the image in pencil, and then I ink it in, preferably with Indian ink, because Sharpie can kind of leave a purple iridescence, which kind of confuse my eye later on. And then I darken the block with screen printing ink, so when I cut, the lighter value of the, as you see here, the MDF will show through, kind of allow me to pre-visualize how the actual image will look on the paper. And you see here all the fine parallel lines that I'm making. I'm trying to stick with the curvature of the form below to not only indicate the value of the light hitting the branch in this case, but also the actual form and curvature of the surface of the object. So if you mix up the types of cuts that you do and the different techniques, you can kind of also visualize different textures, surfaces of light, and atmospheric perspective, and all of these subtleties, which are quite difficult to do in a woodcut, but kind of provide an interesting challenge for me. And once the block is finished being cut, in this case, with this image is a couple weeks from the initial drawing, I will go through and make sure that all the fine lines have adequate valleys to make the actual inking process go a bit easier.
Here's the ink that he uses.
Here I am spreading out some ink on some glass, which I will roll out with this brayer you see there.
Eyes off your phones, eyes up on the screen.
Until it kind of reaches a nice fine consistency. You don't really want an orange peel finish, and you don't want it too thin. I'm going to listen to this bacon frying sound I've heard. And then you carefully, I usually like choosing a brayer larger than the actual block, so I don't dip down into the valleys and ink what's not supposed to be ink. So, and also border helps in this regard. And here's the finished block, and you can see everything is darkened. It's all caked up with thick black greasy ink. And then it's off to the etching press and set the pressure to accommodate the size of the block, and then you can actually start the printing process. Before printing on nice paper, I like to proof the block initially just by printing with printer paper or some shitty newsprint or something, just to kind of get a good judgment of how the printing process is going to go. The blankets you see there ensure that the paper won't shift and kind of dampens and evens out the pressure. Pulling away the blankets, the first print I did on the newsprint turned out surprisingly well. The block was evenly inked and the pressure seemed to be set just about right.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. So you saw how a print was made, and then he would ink it again, print again, ink again, print again, and that's how a woodcut is made. So let's move on to an engraving. A woodcut was made with what kind of material? Wood, that's right. An engraving is made with a metal plate. You can see this guy right here has it looks like copper. So he carves tiny little grooves into a metal plate. And the difference between a woodcut and engraving is that instead of the ink being on top like a woodcut, he pushes the ink into the scratches that he makes into the metal plate. And then he presses the metal plate against paper. The same kind of printing press it was then. All right, so
I'm Emily Peters, Associate Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Photos that would have been used by an engraver. And Andrew made a copy after this drawing, and in doing so, he worked out some of the iconographic elements and the format, making it into an oval.
I'm just going to finish it up. And then I'm ready to remove the tracing from. I'm going to melt a little bit of wax onto this plate. And then spread it out. The wax is going to take an impression from the drawing, so I'm going to use the tracing and then trace through the tracing paper with the stylus, and that's going to leave the drawing on the plate just lightly touched onto the wax. So you can see the impression of the outlines into the wax, and I'll be able to follow those outlines with the dry point tool and scratch those lines in to have a guideline for the whole process. So what I'm doing right now is I'm using this steel tool to scratch the lines in the plate. I'm following the lines I made with the wax, that are already pressed in the wax, and I'm scratching them in the plate with the tool. And what this is going to do is going to give me a very, very pale outline that I can follow throughout the engraving process. So I'm ready to start engraving, and I'm going to place the plate onto this sand-filled pad, and that allows me to have a kind of pivoting action when I work the plate, because one of the principles of engraving, especially for curves, is that the plate is pushed and the tool is stationary. This is an engraving tool, it's called a burin, and it's this square steel shaft that's been inserted.
all right, so you saw him scratch the lines into the plate. So I'm going to move to where he begins
We're in the etching area.
printing the plate.
And we have everything set up here to start moving the plate. This is a dauber, and what it does is it forces the ink into the engraved lines. And now I'm just going to use a card to take off most of the excess.
All right, so what he's done is he's covered the whole plate with ink. And that ink has gone into the scratches that he made into the plate. And now he's removing the ink off the top of the plate.
And start wiping the ink off of the surface of the plate.
And so you begin to see the image. The ink is inside all those lines. And then he is going to press it against paper.
And we're ready for the next stage, which is called hand wiping.
All right.
The paper's been sitting in the bath, and that's allowed it to soften from the gelatin.
So the paper that he's using is very thick paper. Imagine like a birthday card thickness of paper, and that he soaks the paper to make it soft so that it can get pushed into those grooves and touch that ink. And then when he pulls it off, it will pull the ink out of those grooves.
The drawing, which is a drawing of a hermaphrodite in the cloud, was never reproduced as an engraving. So in this case, Andrew took an example of a drawing that no other engraver has attempted.
I'm going to skip ahead. All right, and so he presses it through the press. It pushes the paper against the plate. And the paper goes into those grooves and pulls that ink out of the plate. And that's how you make an engraving. All right, we're going to move on to intaglio. Again, they use a metal plate. In the last one, in engraving, how did they make the grooves in the plate? Right, they scratched it. All right, this time, they're going to use a different process to make those grooves in the plate. They cover the plate with a film, and then they scratch through the film, not the plate. They soak it in acid. The acid that is not covered, or the plate that is not covered with the film, where the acid touches the metal, the acid eats through the metal and makes the grooves. And then the artist will print the picture.
Now is very commonly a copper sulfate solution. Plates then removed, the ground.
Okay, so
it consists of a metal plate.
He hasn't done anything to the plate yet, and he's putting a film on top of the plate.
A drawing is made, a design is created into the ground, and this ground is then placed.
So he didn't scratch through the metal, he just scratched through the film that's on top of it. And now he put it in acid. And the acid is eating through the grooves that he made.
Cleaned, dried, and the wax ground removed with a solvent. This should then reveal the drawn image.
And just like before, he inks it.
The plate is usually then placed onto a hot plate, a heated plate that will allow.
So he covers the whole thing with ink. He pushes the ink into those grooves, and then he's going to use the printing press to print it. All right, the same way. Engraving is scratching through the plate. Intaglio is using acid to eat through the plate.
This paper is then transferred to the press, placed on top.
All right, moving on. We are going to skip past how to sign your print. I do want you to know what an edition is. I guess we will look at it. All right. If you make a painting and it takes you 20 hours and you want to make a copy of it, how much time is it going to take to make another painting just like it? Possibly another 20 hours, maybe a little bit less. All right. It's not very time efficient. But for a print, yes, it takes you a long time to make the drawing that's on the plate. But how much time does it take to press a paper against it? So you ink it, press paper, ink it, press paper, ink it, press paper. You can make lots of copies of your image with printmaking. So an addition is how many copies of that image did you make? So artists like to do like round numbers. You know, you'll make 100 copies from that image. And maybe some of those images weren't perfect. You know, you didn't ink it right, or the paper wasn't wet enough, or it wasn't dry enough. All right. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong during the printing process. So you want to make 100 good prints. So that means you may make a total of 112 prints, right? There were 12 bad ones. Those would be artist proofs. Or you might want to have 100 to sell, and you might want to keep a couple for yourself. Those couple that you keep for yourself would be artist proofs. All right, we're going to end today with how to number and make an addition. Come on. There we go.
In this video, we're going to talk about creating an edition, which is in a collection of prints taken from the same printing plate. We're also going to talk about how to sign and label your prints correctly. So you're going to have an edition of 3 to 5 or even more prints at the end of this, and they all need to be signed correctly. There are 3 things that need to be included in your labeling and signature. But the most important thing is that your labeling and signature all needs to be done in pencil, not pen. So you have your print, and it's a good quality print that you've picked. And the first thing you're going to include is the title. That goes on the far left. Put quotation marks around your title and write it lining up with the end edge of your print. Be creative. Think of something that is witty or goes with your design on your print. The second thing that you're going to include is an edition number.
All right, the edition number. Let's say you make 100 prints. The first print that you make is 1 out of 100. So it's a fraction, 1/100. The second print that you make is the second print out of 100. It'll be 2 over 100. And you go all the way to the 100th print, 100 out of 100. An artist proof is A over P.
This one didn't print exactly centered, so it's going to be something called an artist proof. Again, I need to title it on the left, and then I'm going to write something called an artist proof, A over P. It's part of the edition, but is kept for the artist and may have some printing areas, but is still a quality print.
Have a good day, everybody.